And isn't the book based on, I forget the name of them, but it's kind of like almost like a Roman Secret Service.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that because
okay.
I have a question for the audience here about the title, right? Because I'm having some problem determining what the final title should be. So, you can run this game as whatever you want. You could be legionnaires, you could be just criminals or something. You could be a secret order of some other kind. You could be, you could just be travelers or whatever you wanted, right? But the default fancy of the setting is that it's set up because it's a really good way to create an adventuring party of unorthodox people, is that you are agents of the Frumentari. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Frumentari were originally the grain specialists of the Roman legion. They were an auxiliary legion. They were part of what were called the immunes, which means you're a legionnaire, but you don't actually have to wear the uniform or do drills or do guard duty. You were a specialist, like the engineers were, or other groups like that, right? And the job of the Frumentari originally was that wherever a legion went, they had to make sure that there would be grain supplies that would reach that legion. Right? And
so were they kind of like quartermasters then, or?
Well, in a way, yeah, they were provision specialists, right? That they had to find the best place to get a sufficient source of food that they could then ship to where the legion was, to make sure that the legion was supplied with food, so that there wouldn't be a revolt or something like that, right? And that meant they had to travel all over the empire, right? Because sometimes they had to get it like from Egypt or North Africa, or sometimes they had to go to like some other area that was closer to what was going on, if they were in Pannonia or whatever. And for the first, from the time of the Republic until, or at least the late Republic, I guess, until the time of Trajan, that was their job, right? They had later also taken over some other tasks too in the course of that time, where they also became the supervisors of the mines, right? Gold, silver mines, things like that, right? So they were in charge of making sure that the ores from the mine, met quota and were then delivered to the empire, right? And then they also became couriers, where they would, because they were traveling around everywhere, they would be given vital messages to send to some governor or what have you, right? But then it was Trajan that came up with this idea, because he realized the size of the empire by that time was at its peak, right? And he said, well, I need to know what's really going on, right? Because otherwise there's going to be more of these rebellions like they did in Judea and things like that, right? So he reconfigured the Frumentari so that their cover story is still that they're like, grain specialists, and you might get sent on a mission to do that, right? But they were also secret agents of the emperor, right? Their job allowed them to travel anywhere in the empire. They would be allowed to stay at the misiones, which were like the special imperial houses for imperial agents that were, all kinds of dignitaries or whatever that were traveling along, that they would get to stay there for free. And they would go under the cover of whatever job they're, I'm supervising a mine, or no, I'm sending this message or something, but they were actually there to do some kind of spy job. And then very quickly that turned into assassination jobs. And another thing that they ended up getting by some time, I don't know, if probably around the time of Antoninus or Aurelius, they were in charge of investigating cults that were illegal cults in the empire, like Christians as one example, but there were lots of others, right? And so they are the secret service of the Roman Empire from the 2nd century onwards, right? And so that makes it like a really interesting premise by which you can have a campaign group. They can be sent on missions, right? You can end up taking them as the DM. You can have them, the emperor or the imperial court, send them to anywhere in the empire or beyond, perhaps, right? And of course, different emperors behave in different ways. So some of them might be using the Frumentari for revenge plots, or just for their whims, or to, go, oh, I've heard about this monster that's somewhere in Ethiopia, go get it, right? Or something like that, right? So all these sorts of things that you can do with them, right? So the title, I was originally just going to call it Frumentari, but I realized that there's a lot of people that don't know who the Frumentari were, right? And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do it like that, right? So then I thought about calling it Agents of Empire, right? Except some people told me that sounds too much like Age of Empire, and that might confuse people.
Yeah.
And so now I'm kind of divided. Like, should I call it Agents of Empire, colon Frumentari, or Frumentari colon Agents of Empire, or what it should be titled? So you guys that are in the audience, please let me know which one you think is the best title for the book. I guess you could suggest alternative titles, but I'm going to be pretty. I suspect that I still want it to be something along these lines. And while you guys are thinking about that, there's a question here for me, I guess. What adjustments did you make to Sons? I assume that's meant to be Sons, like Sons of Heaven, to make the rule set match with the setting. So for me, it was relatively simple. Most of the rules were kept the same, but I had to make some changes regarding like the psychic class from Star Adventure versus the sages in Sons of Heaven. In Star Adventure, there's a list of about 20 alien archetypes, and I removed those and instead used the major races of the galaxy in Sons of Heaven as the alien classes that are like the default you can take. But again, the alien generator, you could theoretically use that to have a new species if you wanted to. That could be a player character race too, right? I changed some of the technology. The hyperspace works differently than it did in Star Adventure. But there isn't a big change, right? Most of the mechanics are still kind of the same as they were in Star Adventure. And Chris, he asks, what was the biggest shift in your creative process?
I'm not sure what that means, but I do want to go back to your question though. I thought it was interesting that the government the other day put out some UFO files, and they've got this disclosure document that they put up, and they have said that there are 4 alien races that they know of that have come to Earth and have visited and possibly have relations with the government or whatever. This is all highly dubious anyway, but I thought it was interesting because all 4 of those races are in your game.
That's true. That's true.
So Pundit knows something. So I don't. Let's see.
Say one way or the other.
What is the biggest shift in my creative process? I don't know. I don't know that there has been a shift. I think. I've always. I've always been a gamer. Right. So it's not like this kind of stuff is necessarily new to me. So I've got that going for me. And whenever I want to publish a book for Pundit, for example, it's easy enough for me to read the material and understand, where he's coming from on something. And that's what I tend to do is I start by reading all the content, really getting, into that headspace. And then, like I said before, I may try to play around with envisioning, like making a character or making a set of scenarios or something in my head or on paper and just trying to see, how this world kind of plays out. And then once I get into it, I find it very easy at that point to then start visualizing what I want the book to look like, certainly the artwork that goes in the book and that sort of thing. and then it's just kind of a long process of either talking with an artist and, you know, going back and forth and getting that done, or, you know, as of late, and I say, you know, the last few years, I've been getting more and more into using AI just because it's essentially really convenient and I get good results. But, you know, that process, again, like I said before, you have to really figure out a way to convey the expected result in a way that, you know, in a prompt that that the computer's going to understand and do. And depending on what system you're using, it rationalizes things differently. So you have to treat prompts for Midjourney different than, say, ChatGPT or something. And those are the only two that I really use, but I have a couple of friends that use other ones. And, you know, you just, it's a slog. I mean, like I said, people think it's easy. It's not. It may take me several days to get one good picture. And that's several days, meaning like 8 hours worth of work per day, you know, like typing in prompts and then trying to change something and then taking that out and throwing it back in and telling it to improve it. And, you know, you just, it's a process. And then just about every image end up, like I said, throwing it into, you know, I use PicMonkey a lot. PicMonkey is like, it used to be the broke version of Photoshop, and it was free. It's since, you know, now they charge people for it, and they've dialed back some of the services, you know. This is like a trend that everybody does, right? Everything's cool and free, and then they start charging you monthly for the, you know, less services. But I still like PicMonkey, and I use that a lot to, you know, do digital alterations on the images and stuff, and you know, and then I'll run it by Pundit usually after. When I think it's good, I'll show him, and if he likes it, we'll keep it. If he doesn't, then I'll pull what little hair I have left out and start over. And that's happened a couple of times, which, you know, has been kind of funny, because I'll work on something for like 3 or 4 days, and I'm like, oh, this is a perfect picture, you know, and I give it to Pundit, and he's like, oh, this isn't very good. And I'm like, God damn it.
Oh, sorry.
You know, so it's a process, but I don't know if that's what you were exactly talking about as far as a creative process. I guess other creative things that I may do, like creating my own RPG, for example, are not dissimilar. Again, I have to first. It all starts in my head, and I visualize kind of a cool idea that I've got, or, you know, a set of kind of pictures in my mind as to what I want a setting to look like, or it might even start with a character concept that develops into a setting, which then develops into an RPG. You know, hold on a second.
Okay.
I think that's my wife, unless I'm being robbed.
I'm gonna take advantage of the moment to say that I suspect that the Roman game is going to be a lot easier for the art part to fit well than Sons of Heaven. Sons of Heaven is tricky because it's not, you know, if it's like, you know, Poland or the Middle East or whatever, you know, you've got solid things that
I think there's a lot to pull from
reality, right? But Sons of Heaven is sci-fi, so it makes it a bit more complicated in that sense.
My wife has just entered with a friendly taste of Mexico.
Oh, there we go. So Crapbone says, to be fair, as a Christian, I don't care whether it's a gladiator or a secretary who's killing me. Crapbone, I will mention that Sons of Heaven is set during the Roman game is set in the crisis of the 3rd century. And as you know, that was the great period of the worst persecutions of Christians, and I go into a lot of detail in the setting regarding the martyrs that occurred in that time, the miracles that were involved. There is a class in the game that is the Christian holy man, and the interesting thing about the Frumentari is that towards the end of the time that they existed, they had started out, as I said, part of what their job was to like root out cults that were considered dangerous to the empire, and Christians were among them, right? But for whatever reason, a lot of the Frumentari started to get kind of taken in by the Christians, right? They part of what
they were well traveled,
Yeah, so they started to sympathize with the Christians. In game terms, that becomes easier because Christians have the power of God, so they can deal with some of the supernatural menaces of the game, right? Like that in ways that are easier than pagans can, at least.
Mm.
So by the end of the time of the Frumentari, a large section of the Frumentari agents had become Christians, and in fact, Constantine is the one that disbands the Frumentaris and replaces them with an entirely new order called Agentes in Rebus, of which the initial core were those Frumentari agents who were confessed to be Christians, right? So, because of course, Constantine wanted to go that way, right? And so that was that's all kind of part of the timeline of that game.
Well, they would have been exposed, because they're so well traveled and spent time in the Middle East. I'm sure they'd be more exposed to early Christian stuff, through the Greeks and whatever. That's kind of interesting.
So let's see. Ethiopia overflows with money. Yeah, well, for the Monster Compendium, I have made extensive use of Pliny, of course. And then also Aelian, who Aelian was alive at the time of the campaign, right? His writing was in the first third of the 3rd century, right? So Aelian could actually be an NPC who's like an expert on monsters that consults with the player characters, right? Those are like those two guys together did the largest kind of zoological compendium filled with all of these like weird monsters, of course, that were I guess mythological, at least to us. So there you are. So Crafton says, just call it Agents of Empire. Shalbach Pro says, Frumentari Agente Secrete Imperia. I think that's a little too much Latin. Bond, Rome, Bond. Frumentari Imperial Agents. Eagles in the Dark. I'm not sure about that. Agents of the Imperium.
Yeah, maybe what's the Latin version of imperial agents? It'd be like Agents Imperium or something like that. You know what I mean? Like Agentis Imperium.
Agentis Imperialis, I think.
Yeah. That would be cool.
Could be. I don't know. I've still got it running around in my head. I got to figure that out. We need to have a title at some point, but well, if there's 2 books, we're gonna need to have 2 titles, I guess. But I guess the difference will be like setting guide, campaign guide, or something like that, or rule guide.
History of the World Part 2.
That's right. Well, Sons of Heaven is a little bit like Jews in space, so there you go. All right, so I don't know how much more I can tell you guys about the Roman game, but as you can imagine, it's got a the magic system is based on how Romans viewed magic, which is generally that Romans were very, very superstitious and cautious about magic, but there were tons of magicians anyways. And the monsters are all based on Roman mythology and Greco-Roman mythology.
Well, again, there's going to be lots of fodder for the mind with that kind of stuff. I don't know a whole lot about ancient Roman magic, but what I do know, or what I've seen in some films and things is kind of interesting. So I'd like to see how that plays out. I'm sure you'll do a great job putting it together. So
I was asked there about walk us through character creation. So the character creation is going to be very, very similar from that of like Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire. So you roll for your ability scores, and then you roll for your social class. Of course, the social classes are different, of course, because you got slave, free man, foreigner or provincial, plebeian, wealthy plebeian, equestrian, modest patrician, senatorial patrician. You get background skills based on your social class. Then you have the prior history tables that are obviously geared towards like Roman stuff to some degree, but some of them are similar. There are some that apply in pretty much every case, and then you will end up determining. Well, there's name tables that give the correct way of generating a Roman name if you want to do that. There's then the character classes, and because part of this game presumes that you're Frumentari, and therefore there's a lot of investigative sort of games. There's a mix in the character classes between like characters that are strong adventurers and characters that are more cerebral, right? So you can play. There's an administrator class, which would, somebody who played an administrator would probably be like the lead agent of the Frumentari cell. Barbarian class, it means someone who was at least raised as a barbarian and is now working for Rome. The fighter class is pretty standard, as very, very similar to the ones in those other games I mentioned. The holy man, which is very similar to the holy man
in Baptism of Fire.
That is from Baptism of Fire. The magus, which is a Roman magician, right? A Greco-Roman magician. The philosopher class, which is basically a scholar, though philosophers could also do some magic.
Did you get some for me too?
Mm-hmm. There's the pagan priest class for somebody who has the title of one of the various pagan priesthoods, a thief, and then a wilderness scout, right? So those are the classes that you can play. And then you get kitted up, obviously, with Roman gear. The gameplay is going to be very similar to Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire in terms of the basic mechanics. Shelvebber says, "Oh yeah, I forgot you have social class rules. I need to dig through those for my future West Marches campaign." All right. Well, I'm glad that you've got the option there to
We have a whole book for that.
That's right.
One of your best sellers too.